Welcome. My name is Jan. I'm part of Agile Aarhus, which we also have Jonas and Simon in here, um, which are also facilitating these sessions. We are a hybrid meetup. We have sessions that are, as we are today, virtually, and we have sessions that take place in Aarhus, where we meet up physically. It's kind of a half and half. The next session we have will be physically in Aarhus. It's going to be about AI, as everybody else talks about, but it's going to be more how to actually use it, even though you're not an expert. So it's going to be a design sprint with AI and how to actually start using it for real instead of just talking about it or typing something into ChatGPT, but actually use it in the organization. You can see that on the meetup page if that's are of interest to you, and sign up there. Let's jump into today. Today, Russ will take us through his experience from helping, if I understand this correct, Russ can correct me if I'm wrong afterwards, to helping an organization, and some of the tools to do so is Flight Levels and Kanban that have been used in that. So he's going to share this journey, and he's going to share some of the tools for Be My Guest. I know Ross from a professional fellowship, Better Change, what it says in the button there, just to make that clear to everybody, that we have that relationship. We are still doing this individually. So yeah, I'm not getting anything out of this, is what I'm trying to say. I had Kanban training with Ross also, and think he's a great communicator. And he normally, at least what I'm seeing is when he says something, he actually done it. It's not just a lot of empty air, which I like. I screwed enough up, Ross, already, so I think we should send the ball over to you, and then you can present yourself and take us through this. Welcome.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Thanks for saying I'm a great communicator. That really puts the pressure on to present this this session in a good way. But let's see how that goes. But yes, this is a story of a company I was working with, and it's a story of their journey and how they were a rapidly growing company, and they were starting to lose focus and struggling with the usual things that happen when companies grow quickly. So yeah, my name is Russell. I know Jan and Heidi as well. I can see. Hi, Heidi. From Better Change. I call myself a coach, agile coach, trainer, consultant, whatever you will. But what I do is I help companies improve the way they work, help them solve issues, challenges, problems, things like that. I'm based in Berlin, in Germany, but as you may be able to tell, I'm from the UK originally. But yeah, I've been living in Berlin now for quite some years, and I operate mainly out of Berlin. Okay, so this is a true story. It really happened, and I guess you've all heard of, when the stock market crashes. It's called like a Black Thursday or a Black Wednesday or whatever, right? Well, these guys, my first contact with these guys was let me just see if the presentation's working. Yeah, and my first contact with these guys wasn't a Black Monday or a Tuesday. It was a Black Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Everything was down, right? They were online business. And they had a major outage, and this was my first kind of connection with the company. I was actually just visiting before I started working with them, and when I visited that week, it was the week that they had this major outage. So that's not the reason why they contacted me and asked me to join them, wasn't because they'd had an outage or were having one. It was because they were having other challenges, but it manifested in this black week that they had. It was 5 days long. They were losing customers. Well, you can imagine if you're an online company and you basically everything is down. It's a bit like in a physical shop, just closing the doors and pulling the shutters down and telling customers to go away. So there was a lot of internal panic, and it was a major wake-up call for this business, for this company. Let's talk about the company a little bit. All right, so they're an online legal services company. So they basically, their mission was to disrupt the legal services industry to some extent. They didn't like the idea that in order to engage with legal services, you had to find expensive lawyers and have expensive consultations face-to-face with legal people. They thought there was some opportunity here to provide an online service for legal services. So online is the key, right? They were a pure internet company. So yeah, being down for 5 days is not a good situation. But they wouldn't call themselves a startup. They were 9 years old, but they were profitable after the first year. So they were a real business. They were making real money. They weren't being funded by venture capital and just burning cash. They were a sensible business, and they were doing good things. All right. So they were a good company. But they've gone through a growth phase. They've gone from about 50 people to 350 people in 3 years, and that obviously presents challenges. And one of the things, because they're a relatively young company and growing quickly, they were in relentless pursuit of new features. They described themselves a little bit as a feature factory. All they thought they needed was to just create more features and have more sophisticated features for their customers. And this was one of the challenges that they had. They started out as a business just focusing in one particular legal service, and they wanted to expand that to further services, right? So at the point where they built a growing business predominantly with one legal service, and they needed to grow that to provide other legal services. And just anecdotal conversations. So before they had this week where everything was down, and I'd had initial contact with them, and the CTO, who I knew from a previous engagement, contacted me. He was new in this role. One of the things that they would say was, "Well, we're just not getting things done like we used to. You know, when we were a 50-person company, we could get stuff done. Now we can't. It's just really hard to get things done." And of course, this major outage was a huge problem, and that was forefront in their mind at this moment in time. So how to get started, right, with a company in a situation like this? So once the black week had been fixed and everything was back up, I came into the business and started working with them. And the first thing I do is what I call an initial exploration, and this is to understand the current situation in the organization. And I do this with different perspectives. So one perspective is a team perspective. So I ask if I can actually go and spend a little bit of time with a selection of teams in the organization, right? So maybe 2 or 3 teams, and have half-day workshops with them and actually get them to reflect on their current situation. I also then spend time with individuals. Again, I spend time with a selection of individuals across the business and ask them for their perspectives, and we do one-on-one discussions where I have some conversations, and I elicit sort of information and find out what's happening there on an individual perspective. And I also spend time with the leadership team as well. So usually a half-day workshop with the leadership team to get their perspective. So what I'm trying to do here is understand the situation by having different perspectives in the organization. And I also do what's called a cultural profile. This is using something called the competing values framework. Some of you may be familiar with it already, but it's a useful technique also to understand what is the current culture in the organization. Like, what cultural values do they have, and where is it sitting right now? And that's a useful thing to reflect for the company, and it's also useful for me as a coach or consultant to understand how to work with the company. A summary of the findings. So this exploration typically can take between 3 to 4 days, maybe even 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the size of the business or the size of the part of the business I'm working with. But a summary of the findings with this company. was that they had a fabulous culture and a good group of people. The people enjoyed being there. They really felt part of something, and they had a great purpose. They really felt they were doing something worthwhile. They really thought that disrupting the legal services space was a very worthwhile thing, and they felt themselves as an organization that they were providing good legal and therefore societal value to society and to people who typically wouldn't necessarily be in a position to have good legal representation. So they had a great purpose. People really wanted to be there and they felt they belonged to something. So a good teamwork in the environment. They had the right people with good skills. So they weren't kind of lacking in that space. And they had a relatively flat structure. So they weren't a hierarchical organization, even though they'd grown to 350 people. And the leaders seem to have a lot of trust in the teams and the team members. So there's a lot of freedom to do what you needed to do. So in that sense, it had the right kind of ingredients for an organization, but obviously they were having challenges. Just a sort of quick side move on the cultural profile. So how it looked. So if you're familiar with CVF, I don't want to go into great detail here. That's a whole other presentation that could be talked about CVF. But if you're familiar with CVF, that their dominant cultural profile was what we'd call top heavy. So it was in the clan and the adhocracy areas, and this is a good place where things like lean and agile values can exist. So if you have a culture that is on the top heavy side, then that's kind of quite interesting from a coaching perspective to understand how you can work with the organization and the people within it. If it had, say, a bottom heavy, more on the hierarchical and market culture, then your approach as a coach or a consultant would be different, right, depending on the cultural profile. So the sense was from this cultural profile that they had the people were more open to new ideas and trying change. They were more open to change than perhaps a more conservative hierarchical company. So this is interesting information which helps me as a coach and helps the organization understand itself as well. But getting into some of the challenges that were unearthed from the exploration. Obviously the outages were a huge problem, but like I say, that's not why they contacted me. We'd already made contact before that, but it was a big wake-up call for the organization. But because they'd grown quite quickly, collaboration and transparency was difficult between teams. It was difficult to know what was going on and who was doing what and who was working on what, that kind of stuff. And they had a problem with technical debt and failure load. So naturally, if you have an outage for 5 days, you've got some technical challenges in your organization. And technical debt was something that the technical aspect or the technical part of the organization had been saying and talking about for quite some time. They've been shouting technical debt, and the rest of the business have been going, well, we don't understand what you mean. Forget about it. Just create some new features. And so they had a lot of failure load. So failure load meaning that they're spending a lot of time fixing things that should be working. So that's absorbing a lot of their capacity as an organization. They had a lot of projects to work on, too many, they would say, too many projects to work on, unclear priorities, which ones should be working on, which ones shouldn't be. Everything's priority one, that kind of usual thing that you often see. And there was a lot of unplanned work and interruptions. So if you've got technical debt, you're dealing with failure load, you usually don't know when that's coming up. And so that's unplanned, and interruptions work were difficult. And lastly, they're completely unpredictable. So one of the challenges that the CTO said to me was, in the 9-year history of this company, we've never delivered what we say what we would deliver in a quarter. So we do our quarterly planning, and at the end of the quarter, we never deliver what we thought we would deliver. We're always wrong. We can never be predictable, and that's a real challenge for the organization if they're trying to expand their services into other things. So they had some challenges. So where to start, right? So one of the things I worked with the organizations to say which area of the business should we start in, and the challenging area seemed to be in the product and tech division. So that was about 60 people, several teams. I say several teams because the company had grown and it wasn't really clear who and where the teams were, right? The team formation was kind of somewhat flexible. But we're talking about 60 people, predominantly technical, product development, software development, and product people. So this is where we focused on initially. And what we did initially was have some foundational workshops. In other words, have workshops where people can start thinking differently about things like flow and how flow works in an organization, some principles and some practices, do some simulations of Little's law and flow and how things work, and how people can start connecting with these concepts. Also identifying and enhancing existing practices. So just remember, this is a 9-year-old company that was profitable from year one. So what they were doing was not all bad, right? So it wasn't really a case of saying everything you're doing is wrong, you should be doing this. It's more a case of let's enhance what you already have, because you are doing something good. You are a profitable business. So create a common understanding of the idea of continuous improvement, how as an organization we have to evolve and evolve continuously and ad infinitum. You never stop. It's like evolution in the biological sense. And really the idea of these foundational workshops was to help people think differently about their working environment. They come out of the workshops usually with a different perspective of what is possible for them within their context. And these foundational workshops are usually very, very powerful. So it's a good way of getting people to say, okay, from now on, we can actually think differently. We can be open to new things. We should try new things. And everyone comes out of it with often a different vocabulary. They start using language that they've never used before. And this is useful to help start a journey. And so after those foundational activities, it was really about starting some 5 activities. And the 5 activities begin with visualize. In other words, make stuff visible. We can't see what's going on. So if we can see what's going on, we can work on it. We can see where the challenges are. So the first activity was to visualize a situation. Second activity was create focus. Okay, now we can see what's going on. Let's see where we need to focus. Let's see which are the things we need to apply our efforts. The third activity was to establish interactions. In other words, get people to collaborate and work together, and bring people together in an environment where they can actually do something useful and have useful conversations, useful decisions, useful discussions. The fourth activity is to measure progress. So of all these things that we are doing, are they giving us value? Can we measure that? Can we see that? Can we have some data on that? And then the final 5th activity is actually to improve all of those things. So you never really stop, right? You're in this constant loop of adapting, evolving, and improving. So you're always looking for ways in which any of those 4 activities above can be improved. So let's dive deep a little bit into the different activities. So starting with activity 1, visualize. So it was really important to build a picture and to see what's going on and to see how work is flowing through the organization, to see what's actually happening. So the first iteration of a visualization was a simple board like this. And this was a simple board which was on a level of project and multiple team activities. So this is not a board which is visualizing what a team is doing, but a board that is visualizing things like projects or initiatives, larger pieces of work which affect multiple teams. And the idea really is we're creating what we sometimes call an understanding of the current situation, of the status of the progress, but also a common misunderstanding. In other words, it's just a simple visualization. It's a model of what's happening. All models are wrong, but some are useful, and this is the first iteration of a visual model. So it's just something which is there to help us see the world differently, and then we know that it's wrong, and we will evolve it over time. In terms of creating focus, we kind of see, now we can see things, we can actually see what we need to focus on, and we should prioritize the work accordingly. So then if we can see a bunch of work, we say, okay, well, which is the area we need to focus on? Where should we start applying our efforts? Because starting 20 things and finishing none is not a good strategy for an organization, right? And the other message I think which is good around this this creating focus is starting work costs money, but finishing work makes money, right? And so the more you start, the more you're spending, but the more you finish, the more you make, right? And these conversations in front of a visualization help particularly the product folks realize that maybe we just need to start focusing more. So it's about completing existing work before starting new. This is an important aspect of that that creating focus. And then the third activity is what we call agile interactions. In other words, bringing people together, right? So if we can bring people together in front of something visual and physical, and it's focused, it's got focused work on it, conversations start to happen. So we start to get clearer communication, we get clearer collaboration, and then the team members and the various teams can actually see who's working on what, and then they can actually have sensible conversations. And this helps this collective decision making. So if the right people are in front of the right information and they have the opportunity to talk to each other, then collective decisions will start to emerge out of that. And then the measure progress. So the measuring progress was really about creating some simple metrics that were relevant to their context, right? So these metrics are not a blueprint that all organizations should have. These are the ones that made sense to this organization. And so for them, they needed to understand what was planned work and what was unplanned work. And they needed to understand what the outages were and how many outages they were having. And what's the delivery rate? How frequently are we actually delivering stuff? And you might see on that picture there that the crisis categorization. So they really took this idea of Black Monday, Black Tuesday, Black Wednesday. They called a code black when they had an outage, right? So if they had an outage, it was called a code black, and this language started to emerge in this kind of new way of thinking. And so this cult, you could then get a suggestion, a hint that the culture was starting to evolve and starting to change, and they started to use different language. So they created categorizations of outages. And then the other thing that they started to think about was, well, we are releasing work, we're getting stuff finally finished, but do we know if it's helping us? Has that work that we finished and launched, is it actually achieving the business outcomes that we hoped it would achieve? So they started to think about monitoring work once it was finished, once it was live. So they would monitor work over a quarter, observe the expected outcome with intended outcome, or expected with actual outcome, and then create a feedback loop back into future projects that are coming in. So are we learning from the things that we've launched, and does that influence the new things that we want to build? So creating a feedback loop on a kind of meta level within the organization on a project level. So that was the measure progress. And then finally, the fifth activity is to improve, right? So, okay, we've set up a rudimentary system, we're running, we're doing these things, but we don't stop. We just keep going, and we start identifying the new challenges and what are the new things we need to do. And let's experiment with some new ideas and new improvements, and then just continually do this. So this gives us a concept of evolution, right? We're evolving now. So we haven't just created something, built something, and then that's it, we've finished. We constantly reflect and we constantly improve on this system. And so we have evolution, right? So we have things that evolve, right? And so the activity around visualization, this evolved quite significantly. So this was the first visualization that they threw up on a board just to kind of see what was going on in terms of projects. And as you can see, there's a lot of projects that they were trying to work on. And as things evolved over time through these feedback loops, so did the visualization. The visualization started to evolve, and it evolved over a period of weeks and months. And after about 4 to 5 months, they kind of got to something like this. And this is what the visualization then showed. Now, reading that is difficult, so I've created a more kind of easier thing to read and see here. So this was a visualization of project work. So work that was coming into the organization that required multiple teams to work, usually multiple teams to work on to get it to work. And let's take a little sneaky peek at it a bit closer. So over on the left-hand side, the idea of a project was a piece of work which they felt there would be more than 5 days of work. So a rudimentary kind of sizing of the work. Is it 5 days or more? Yeah, probably. Okay, let's call it a project. And they would start off as ideas, and then there would be some initial investigation work and getting it ready to start. And then once a project is ready to start, and the definition of ready to start meant that it had been understood by representatives of the teams, and they had some rudimentary ideas of what the user stories would be for that project. And then it would get pulled into the next column where you see the 5, the width limit of 5 above it. And that would be projects in progress, right? So here there was a limit of 5 projects in progress. And the project would break down into user stories. So what you start to see here is like a horizontal backlog for each project. So there's a bunch of user stories in the backlog refinement column, but in the next column to the right, the ready to pull, this is where work is ready to be executed by the teams. And then in sprint would be the space where the work is actually being done. So this means that the user story with a purple dash on it is one that's being done by the purple team, and the one with the yellow dash is the one with the yellow team. So this suggests and helps us realize that Team Purple and Team Yellow are collaborating here on this user story. So they're collaborating on the project. They're working together on this project. And you can see the other visualization elements, where other projects are in progress by various teams. And then once the user stories are complete and the project is done, it goes into the monitoring phase where it's monitored for a while. So this is the visualization of their board and how it evolved over time and how it changed through the feedback loops. And so what we see here is the project work above, but each team had their own individual team boards, their own visualizations, right? So that the effort here with this organization was less on a team level. It wasn't the teams that needed the help, it was the coordination across multiple teams that didn't really exist. So the teams were running in their own way. Some were kind of doing a scrummy thing, some were doing a bit more Kanbanish, didn't really matter. They had their work, they had their visualization, and they could see the work that was going on. And then the work, the user stories would then be propagated to the various teams. They would pull them from the main board, take them to their teams and work on them as a team, as these user stories, multiple user stories. And then once the user story was complete, then the projects or the user stories would move on the higher board, and the project would move over. But of course, the teams also did their team specific work, right? So they didn't just take work from this meta board, this project board. They also had work that they could deliver from start to finish independently. So that was also visualized on their board. And so this is what it looked like, as physical artifacts. You can see there's purple team on the left and the green team in the middle and the yellow team on the right, and their various visualizations of how they would work within their teams. And connecting the boards is an interesting pattern. This is something that people find useful, I think, is what we have is a coordination board above, the one with the projects on it, and we have big items on there, big pieces of work. But in order to visualize that and see that, what we'd literally do is they would take those user stories, copy them down onto the individual board, and then as the individual team board would work on the slices of the user story, and then the slices would move over, and then the last piece of work would be over, and then the big user story is now complete. It would go back up to the project board, the coordination board, and then move over to the done column, right? So this is kind of how they connected these systems together. And so this is how their visualization evolved. And again, a period over 4 to 5 months. So activity number 2, how did this evolve? Creating focus, right? So this also evolved. And focus was maintained by focusing on the most important projects. So what they would actually start to do and have conversations are what are the top 5 things we need to work on next as an organization? What are our top 5 projects? And that's what they would visualize in that board that we see. But because we were able to change the kind of idea, the thinking that if we can focus on 5 things and just work on them initially and get them working, that's the kind of good thing to do. And then they started to kind of enhance this idea that we can also say, well, okay, in other areas of the business where we need to do work, what are the top 5 must-haves that we need to have? So things that are not projects, but are things called must-haves. How can we limit the number of defects so that we only have a fixed amount of work that we're working on and not being distracted by lots of things? And adapt as the situation changes. So what the organization realized through this visualization, that at some point after the 4 to 5 months, that having 5 projects in parallel didn't make sense. It was too much. They needed to reduce that WIP limit so they could focus on other things. And so the adaptation of the board was that here we can see that instead of having 5 projects, we're actually blacking out one of the rows there. We're going to reduce this limit down to 4. So once we burnt down to 4, projects, then we'll keep it at 4, right? So this is the live adaptation of focus, right? So we're seeing what's working, what's not working, and then adapting accordingly. The interactions, how they evolved, right? So first of all, there was no new meetings, right? So we just repurposed the existing ceremonies that already existed, right? So one of the things that people often say, we've got too many meetings, and if you come along as a coach or a consultant and say, no, we're going to do something different now, and they're going to go, oh no more meetings, right? So helping the organization realize that we can just adapt what we already have in place. The organization also, we ensured that we maintain the same rhythm, the same cadence. So they already had this idea of 2-week sprints and Scrum. They were doing that on the team level. So we kind of maintained that cadence, and those ceremonies that already existed, like sprint review and refinement and sprint planning, we just adapted those existing ceremonies, but did them on a different level, right? So I didn't try and introduce anything major or anything new. Because we had this visualization and we could see the projects that were in progress, and therefore the stories that needed to be executed for those projects, the teams could just collaborate together in front of the visualization and decide together which teams need to work with whom to make this piece of project work, this bit of a project work, right? So the teams could collectively decide which work to pull and how to best fulfill the work that's needed. It was all there, it was all visible. They can just stand in front of it and talk to each other, and things would start to happen. And so this natural occurrence of collaboration just emerged out of creating this system. It's not something that needed to be pushed or enforced. It was just a natural emergence. So what happened with measuring things? Okay, so right, one of the things that the organization had still had in its mind, this major wake-up call, was this big outage that they had. And this big outage was essentially a concept of technical debt, right? So they neglected their platform, their code base, their work for so long that the perfect storm occurred, and they had this big outage. And so because we could visualize projects now and see them, we could actually help have discussions about, well, how many of these projects are we going to work on, which are actually going to reinforce and build our system back up to a robust system. In other words, reduce technical debt. So in the Kanban world, you might call these pieces of work intangible pieces of work, because they're intangible in that we can't say they're going to give us any profit or any increased customers or whatever, but it will make our systems more robust. So it's somewhat intangible. So having this vocabulary helped the organization recognize that maybe we need to increase the number of intangible pieces of work. In other words, work to make our systems more robust. Maintenance work or insurance policies, if you like, so we can make our work better. And we can track that over time. So we noticed that as the number of code blacks, the number of outages started to drop, the system was becoming more robust, and therefore we could spend less of our capacity on these technical debt projects and actually increase the capacity of the yellow projects, which are kind of new features, new capabilities, right? So having this data and being able to see it helps us make informed decisions about how we can move forward. So yeah, as those code blacks reduced, then the percentage of tech-related work tech debt-related work was reduced as well, and we could increase the new features. And this concept kind of gave the business an understanding, a vocabulary to really talk to each other more effectively. So for years, 8 years or so, the technical team had been shouting technical debt, technical debt, technical debt. The business had been shouting more features, more features, more features, and no one was really talking to each other or listening to each other. And this helped evolve a vocabulary. So when people started talking about intangible work, and they showed this chart of an intangible profile, people knew what they were talking about. Everyone in the organization understood this concept. This concept of something is intangible, it's going to hit us at some point in the future. We don't know how long away it is. We don't know how hard it'll hit us. But if we don't do something, it will hit us, right? And because they've had this major outage, they could refer to that and say, look, we know this has happened to us. We ignored the intangible work for 8 years, and then what happened, right? So it was an interesting education for the organization. Another interesting concept that occurred, if we go back to the visual board, which evolved after 3 or 4 months to this kind of position here, it started to engage other parts of the business. So remember, we're just talking here with product and technology, right? It's a 350-person company. There was a whole other business out there, marketing, sales, legal, and legal wasn't legal as in keeping the business legal. Legal was as in these are the legal services we want to provide, right? So it was a kind of a big part of the organization. So it was 350 people at this point, and we'd really only been working with about 50 or 60. But because this was visible and people could see it and people could interact with it, it started to get people to show up and say, okay, well, what's happening here? How does this work? And can we be part of this? It looks quite of interesting. And so what happened was initially the visualization was just projects, and projects was anything over 5 days. But there were other things that the organization needed to do, right? So there were things like the legal team would say, well, we've got this piece of work. It's not a project. It's not 5 days. It's probably much smaller than that. Can you have a look? And they said, well, if it's not a project, how do we deal with it? So we said, okay, let's create another type or other types of work to fulfill the services of the business. And so in this area here, the board then evolved again and expanded to provide what they called department must-haves. And they gave it that type of work, that name, because that's what made sense to them, right? So because the various departments would come to them and say, we must have this and we must have that. Okay, let's create a department must-haves. This is anything that is less than 5 days, a 5-day piece of work. And it would feed into the system. There's a backlog, there's a ready to pull, and there is the in progress, and then you can see which teams are working on them, etc., etc. And they also needed to deal with defects. They still had outages and defects, right? So severities 1, 2, 3, and 4. So they would also be in the system, and we could see them. And even simple things like service requests. So that there was no kind of internal IT department. So if someone joined the company and they needed a new account or needed access to certain platforms, then that had to be dealt with by someone in this technical team. Unless someone left the company, we needed to disable their accounts, those kinds of things. So internal IT related kind of services. They wanted to visualize that as well, because that took up time as well, and it was an interruption. So we needed to see what was going on there. And so what we have here is then an evolution again of the work. And I like to call this the magnetic effect. So this happened because people could see what was going on, and they thought, okay, hang on, this is good. Let's be part of this. And so it expanded, it organically grew in the business. It started to manage more than just projects in the business, and it started to manage more things as well. So that visual attractor, that magnetic effect is a powerful way for this way of working to expand in the organization. So what emerged, right? So these interactions in front of the board, what kind of happened? Well, transparency was dramatically increased. Everyone could see what was going on. We could make good decisions. We could have good conversations in front of the information and make those better decisions. The coordination between teams was just tenfold improved, because everyone could see what was going on, and that created the better collaboration. And this concept of evolution started to become a norm. So people realized that we never stand still, we always evolve. But that doesn't mean we're always in chaos and we're always going through change. It just means that we're always thinking about, well, how could we make this a little bit better? And so people became much more open to experimentation and learning and trying different things, and some things would work and some things didn't, right? So maybe in this presentation, I'm painting a picture that it all went nice and smoothly from A to B, but of course it doesn't. There's ups and downs. Some things worked, some things didn't, and but it's evolved. It's evolved into something that was better before. So what were the results and the impact? So outages reduced virtually down to zero within about 3 to 4 months. They'd kind of gone down to zero, and the systems have become much more stable. So this idea of intangible work, technical debt, have become a better understanding. So that really helped the organization kind of move forward. this engagement of the broader business, right? The magnetic effect of what you're doing and how that naturally spreads into the organization to include other parts of the organization, other departments and things like that. And then for the first time in the company history, they were predictable. So I remember the CTO coming to me after about 5 months and said, that last quarter that we did, that last quarter of work, we delivered exactly what we said we would deliver. It's the first time we've done that in 9 years. And that was a kind of a major win for the organization. They really felt they'd kind of matured into something. And so this concept, this idea became the operating system for the organization. And this, what we've just gone through there, it has a name, it's called something, and it's called Flight Levels and Kanban, right? So we've kind of gone through a system of implementing a flight level 2 system. So that level 2 system, which you see in the middle there on that top image, that's a way of creating a coordination level within an organization. So how can we coordinate work across multiple teams? Make it visible, make it have focus, get people to engage with it and measure its progress. So flight levels is kind of two things, those 3 levels that we see here of level 1, 2, and 3, and those 5 activities. So those 5 activities that were followed by the organization are the flight level activities. So visualize, create focus, establish interactions, measure progress, and then constantly improve how you do those things. So this became the operating system for the organization. And what were the next steps? Well, the next steps would have been to actually move up to the next level, level 3. Flight levels. This is where you bring in strategic work. So how do these projects that we're all working on, how do we get them? Where do they come from? Right? Where's the strategy? Right? And so the next evolution from there would have been to bring in a level 3 system so we can see strategic work. So lastly, key lessons. So what were the kind of key lessons from this whole experience? Not just for me, but for the organization as well. Well, one of the things is this idea that co-creation. I'm a great communicator. Co-creation is crucial. In other words, I didn't go in and build this stuff for them. I just created the right environment to those foundational activities so they were open to something and they would build it themselves. I would just help them, steer them, direct them in a certain way. But this co-creation is critical. It fostered engagement. People have felt like they owned their own systems. The sustained change, so change that lasts, takes time, right? So 4 to 5 months to get to that kind of point where they had something which was really helping the organization. So sometimes an organization and its leaders need to have patience. Things don't happen overnight. There's no just click to install and everything is going to be perfect. It's not how the real world works. This idea that the organization would focus only on new features, it's a very dangerous kind of idea. You've got to really think about your systems that you're working on, right? You need to have your little insurance policies just like we do in life, right? So if the house burns down, are we covered? So you need to have those insurance policies. The organization, finally, the CTO proudly told everyone, yes, we can be predictable. We felt like we were a chaotic organization, but we can actually have predictability. And this is an interesting point, right? So the way the approach of this work was not to say, okay, everyone, we're going to do Kanban, or okay, everyone, we're going to do flight levels. Kanban and flight levels was never mentioned. Never mentioned. This is called stealth Kanban or stealth flight levels. In other words, me as a coach and helping the organization, I kind of knew what we were doing in terms of we were following a set of activities and a set of principles. And we talked about those principles and activities with the organization, but never once did we say, okay, you're now doing Kanban. And there's a good reason for this, because if you go into an organization and say, okay, yeah, you're doing that stuff over there, but now we're going to do this. This creates the impression, oh, not another transformation. Not again. We've been through all this. We did this 5 years ago. Now we're trying something new. And the focus turns to the method, and the focus should be on solving real business problems. And that's all we did. We focused on solving real business problems. So if you went to this organization now and said, you know, what, or if you went to them after that 4 to 5 month period, they wouldn't not have said to you, well, we're doing Kanban or we're doing flight levels. They would just said, well, we're doing our own thing. We're just evolving. We're getting better, and we're going in the right direction. We're solving these business problems, and I think that's important. It's too much focus on the method and less on actually creating business outcomes. And this natural engagement of the wider business, the wider organization, this evolutionary spread within the organization was a key lesson as well. And finally, this idea that flight levels was always present. Flight levels exists in every organization. Every organization needs to work on a team level. Every organization needs to coordinate work between teams, unless teams can deliver end-to-end in isolation, which usually they can't. And every organization has some kind of strategy which needs to feed into the organization, and that's what these 3 flight levels are, and they exist in every organization, but we just need to make them visible and work with them. So that's not too bad for almost 50 minutes. Okay, so I wanted to leave more time at the end for questions and discussions, but I've gone a little bit over. Anyway, so Flight Levels and Kanban is coming to Aarhus. So in May, I will be in Aarhus. I'm doing a flight levels training. This is the self-promotion bit, by the way. I'm doing flight levels training, and I'm doing Kanban training. And there's a discount code for people who are here today, if you want to do this. And also, if this training doesn't go ahead and I don't come to Aarhus, then I've got to go and visit my wife's family for a birthday party in Frankfurt. I don't want to go and visit my wife's family for a birthday party in Frankfurt. So think about that if you want to sign up for some training. Okay, I'm done. Over to you. I haven't been monitoring anything, so I don't know if there's any questions or comments or whatever.
Yeah. So there are some questions in the chat, but I just think we should open the room, and if people have any questions, just throw them in there.
I can start us off, I guess. I saw that you are running the project, the technical debt decrease as projects. Do you have any concerns that it might, revert back to the same levels of technical debt, partly once the ones that have experienced, the outages are gonna depart, and potentially come in a new set of business leadership that will go back to just focusing on features?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. So I'm not sure if it was clear. Can I see it there? No. I'll try. Yeah, it's not going to work. It's going to go through all the animations again. So when the project board was visualized, there was actually 2 types of work, 2 types of project that were visualized. In this visualization, they were colored green and yellow, right? So green meant technical debt work, and yellow meant they were kind of regular projects, which were new features or new capabilities, that kind of thing. So the visual aspect was very clear. So the business could see how much of our efforts was on technical. Well, when I say technical debt work, what I mean is working on the infrastructure to make the organization more robust, right? So it was things like working on the data center and creating more redundancy and etc., things like that. So it was intentional that the work was visually separate. You could visually see it. Now, as time progressed, the amount of technical debt-related projects decreased, but they never went away. They were always there. But there was enough history in the organization, enough information in the organization to recognize that you should never really diminish that to zero. You should never now go back to the way we were before, where we're just relentlessly pursuing new features. So the technical debt work never went down to zero. There was always some elements in there. Where it ended, I actually don't know, because I don't work there anymore. But I'd imagine that they probably had 10% of their capacity was working on technical debt type projects. I can imagine. Yeah.
Rasmus?
Yes, a couple of questions. So the board in reality was a physical board, so there was no remote workers.
Yeah, actually it was both. So it was a hybrid. So this company, they had people in Berlin, but also in other parts of Europe as well working. So there was a bit of a hybrid existence of the organization. And so they had some people. Majority of people were in the office, and they wanted to create something physical that they could interact with. But they also had a digital. They were using Jira underneath to manage the work, the individual tickets and the smaller pieces of work, and they maintained that. But the place of truth, if you like, the place where they wanted to actually make proper decisions was the physical space in the room. They could have easily, if they needed to, they could have just switched it to a virtual environment if they would have wanted to, and created it in a Miro board or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And who used it? Was sales looking at it? Was top management looking at it, or was it only the teams who actually had things on that board?
Initially, it was the product and tech division. So that's kind of 50, 60 people. It represented the work of 50, 60 people. The people who interacted with it were the team members, but not necessarily all of them. So representatives of the team members, the product owners, the coaches of the teams, and the senior leaders in the organization that were talking about the projects and could see which projects they were working on. So the CTO would interact with it, the head of legal, the head of sales, the head of operations. So it was there as a visual radiator, but it was actually physically used by the individual team members or representatives of the individual team members. And it was in the office, on a wall in the office where people could see it and interact with it.
Yeah. Final question. I'm doing something similar, just on a bit smaller scale right now. I'm hitting some bottlenecks. Did you at any point hit that, and how to deal with that?
Yeah, so this system did as well, right? So initially they had they had a limit of 5 projects that could be in progress at any one time. And then there was other work that they needed to do, like the department must-haves and the defects and things like that. And they realized that the progress or the flow of the project was suffering. It was getting reduced and reduced. So they had a bottleneck. They had too much other work, non-project work to do, and so they were struggling with getting the balance right. So they because everyone could see it and they could have a discussion about it and they could have a conversation about it, they said, well, maybe what we should try is actually just reducing the number of projects that we're doing in parallel. So they went from 5 to 4. And the intention there was as a temporary thing, we'll reduce it from 5 to 4. A few weeks ago, we thought 5 was the good number. Maybe it's too much. Let's reduce it to 4. And then we can apply a bit more focus on these defects that we're getting and the department must have pieces of work that we're getting, and see if we can get the balance right. We'll monitor it for a while and then we'll change it if necessary. So the idea is the bottlenecks are visible, right? And the only thing that's going to solve those bottlenecks are conversations with the relevant people and experimenting with different things. Little's law tells you if you've got a bottleneck, reduce your WIP limit. And that's what they did.
Yeah, thank you.
And then we have Trine.
You mentioned something about a common language to keep the business interested in the technical depth. Could you elaborate on that? What kind of language could that be?
Yeah, so it was. Let's see if I can find it. I've got a picture of it here, I think. Yeah, so this one here. So that's a picture from something they had on their wall. I'm sorry if it's a bit small. What it is, it's a profile of time on the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis is impact, right? And this is called the intangible, an intangible piece of work. What this means is that the impact on the business evolves over time. So over time, if we do nothing, then suddenly the impact will be quick, it'll be hard, and it'll hit us hard. This is what happened with this organization. They'd had this major blackout for 5 days, and when you talk to individuals in the organization, the technical people will say, well, we've been talking about this for years, all this technical debt we've got. This was bound to happen. And the business didn't understand this concept of technical debt. So just shouting technical debt at the business made no sense, right? It just hit a wall for 8 years. But now when we started talking about and showing pictures like this, well, what we're talking about here is intangible work. We need to upgrade our database. It's not going to make us any more money. It's not going to increase customers. It's not going to, I don't know, increase our customer base. It's not going to be a better user experience particularly. But if we don't do it, then we're going to have an outage like we had before. Right, and so you can use this language of intangible. It's an intangible piece of work, and that's what they used. That really connected and resonated with them. Now, it doesn't mean that every organization needs to talk about intangible work. You have to find your own vocabulary as an organization, but you're bringing people together, you're having the conversations, and you're recognizing that if we just pursue features alone and don't keep our systems in good order, it's a bit like not maintaining your car and just driving it all the time, right? So it's a way of just finding a language which people understand. That and I guess for this company, they'd learned the hard way, right? 5 days outage for an online company is, I mean, that breaks companies. That's what puts you out of business, right? So they realized that they had a problem. They just needed to find a language that made sense to everyone that they could use. Does that help, Trin?
Yes, thanks.
And Heidi?
Just a little quick question. I know we're running out of time. Did you by any chance do a cultural evaluation afterwards? Were there any measurable cultural changes in this?
Good one. Yeah, we did. We did a CVF again. And the cultural profile didn't change that much. The amount of change after about 6 months was kind of almost a rounding error in difference. So the culture hadn't really changed in terms of the CVF. There was still a top-heavy culture. They slightly a bit more innovative, but the numbers that came back didn't indicate a massive shift. But that was okay, right? Their culture was in a good place. What the CVF helped in this situation was to understand their current culture and say, okay, well, if they're open to have a clan and an innovation type culture, then they're probably open to more radical ideas and doing some cool things, and they were, all right, and so that helped in this situation. But yeah, afterwards the cultural profile hadn't changed much, but that was okay. They were more about solving the problems. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Ross, and thank you all for all the questions.